Let's look at the next topic, servlets. Servlets are server-side programs. They are request and response oriented programs. A client makes a request. Suppose you enter something in the form and you submit the form. Who's going to handle that form details? Someone has to pick up the details that you have entered from the form and do some processing on it. Maybe store it, or and then after storing, and they have to reply back. So you get a screen back saying that whether it was successfully created, or whatever the reason the form was displayed for. Basically, the next result comes in on your screen, on your browser window. So who's going to actually pick up this data from the form and process it? Or you click on the link. When you click on the link, the next page has to come in, right? So when you click on the link, there should be some sort of a processing that's happening on the server side, which gives you that output back on the browser. So who's doing all this work? It's the server-side program. So servlets are server-side programs which do this work for you. Previously, there existed server-side programs called CGI and ASP. Then servlets came into picture. So even today we have those programs. But how are they different from servlets? Of course, servlets are server-side programs for Java. CGI can be written with Perl or any other language. ASP is a Microsoft product. So how are each one of these different? In case of CGI, for every client request, there's a separate process which starts off, which then picks up the request of the client, processes it, and gives back a response. So for every client request, a separate process is started. So to bring up that new process itself takes some time. And also for each process, you require a separate resource. This is the drawback with CGIs. Whereas if you compare with ASPs, for every client request, it creates a thread. So within this thread, it processes the client request, gives back a response. So less resource usage, because in case of threads, it shares the same resource. Less time required, because we're not starting a new process. Within a process, you're just creating a thread and executing within that thread. Servlets also work the same way. When a client request comes in, it creates a thread within which the client request is processed and gives back a response to the client. So now, how is servlet different from ASP? ASP work on Microsoft servers. As far as the servlet goes, it can run on any environment, because the servlet specification is such that it is defined such that it does not depend on any protocol, nor does it depend on the environment on which it is supposed to run. So the specification does not define any one of these. So therefore, servlets can run on any web server. Web server is a server which consists of an environment within which the web-based programs, the server-side programs, can execute within, which is able to process the request and give back a response. So this environment within which this content runs, the program runs, is called as a servlet container, or a servlet engine, previously known as. So servlets are server-side programs which are therefore request-response oriented or based programs. In order to write a servlet, you need to work with a package called javax.servlet and javax.servlet.http. When you need to write a servlet class, the servlet class has to be a public class. and this class needs to extend from HTTP servlet class or what is known as a generic servlet class. That's what makes your class a servlet class. Again, servlet has its own life cycle. It starts with the init, then goes to a service and destroy. Something similar to applets, the life cycle. Init and destroy gets executed only once in a lifetime of a servlet, whereas service gets executed for every client request. So which means to say, when a client makes a request, the service is getting executed. It is the service method which contains the logic for processing the client request and giving back a response to the client. All these methods come from what is known as a generic servlet class. As I mentioned, you can either derive your servlet class from generic servlet or HTTP servlet. Now, the servlet, as it is a server-side program, it is a non-UI based program, unlike an applet. Applet, since it runs on a web client, which is a browser, it had to be a UI based program. Servlet, since it runs on a server side, there is no UI involved there, it's a non-UI based program. So there is no stop and paint and start methods out here. Now, coming to this generic servlet class, as we mentioned initially, that servlet is not specified as to in which environment or which protocol it needs to run with. So we can derive our servlet class from a generic servlet class which is not specific to any protocol. But we know that over the internet we use the HTTP protocol, so they have provided us with a HTTP package which consists of HTTP specific protocol specific set of classes. HTTP protocol specific set of classes. So we have a HTTP servlet class which is specific to a HTTP protocol which is derived from generic servlet. So if tomorrow you want to have another class which is a servlet class specific to some protocol, you can always derive from generic servlet class and implement for your own protocols. These three methods come from generic servlet class. The init method, service method and the destroy method are instance methods of generic servlet class, which means I need an object to invoke these methods. Who's going to create this object? Now if you go back to applets, the same thing happened. Here also the JVM creates an instance of your servlet class and then invokes the lifecycle methods. How does the JVM create an instance of your servlet class? It uses the reflection API. For every class loaded into a JVM, a class object is created.